Robert, thanks for coming on. Really appreciate you taking the time to have a conversation with me. Would you mind telling us a little bit about yourself before we get started?
Yeah, I'm a philosopher of religion, Christian. I am chair of the department here at the University of New Brunswick. I've written a number of books on special divine action, and quite a few articles.
Cool. Today's topic was divine intervention and laws of nature. Could you tell us your position on that? Because I know the classic position is that you can't have miracles, can't have divine intervention from Hume because that would be a violation of the laws of nature, and those don't happen. So, what is your position on the topic?
Well, the classic argument of critics against miracle, or one of them, stems from David Hume, and he put forward the following argument. He said, well, if we're going to believe in miracles, we ought to do so on the basis of evidence. And the rational person believes that for which you have the most evidence. And he goes on to say, well, a miracle is a violation of the laws of nature. And he then asks the question, he says, well, which do we have more evidence for, the testimony for miracles? Hume presumes that you'd never see one yourself, and he's interested in undermining Christian accounts. So he's talking about testimonial accounts. He says, could the testimonial account for a miracle ever outweigh the amount of evidence we have for a law of nature? And he says, given that they conflict, given that you can only have one or the other, we should take the option that has the most evidence. And he says, then by the nature of the case, we will always have more evidence for the laws of nature than we do for miracles. And on that basis, he has argued that there could never, even in principle, be enough testimonial evidence to believe in a miracle. Now, I should say that some commentators, they do want to claim that Hume allowed that in principle there could be enough evidence, but I think that they misread Hume's essay of miracles when they say that. I think they're saying what they think Hume should have said rather than what he did in fact say.
One clarifying question: was Hume referring to there couldn't be any kind of evidence, or specifically testimonial?
Hume takes for granted that you wouldn't see one yourself. He's very definitely a non-believer, so he doesn't really ever consider the possibility of observing one yourself. In addition, if you're looking at Christianity, at this point, we would only have testimonial evidence. We couldn't have firsthand evidence of the resurrection. So he doesn't really ever consider that there would be anything other than testimonial evidence for a miracle.
Make a distinction between like scientific testable evidence versus testimonial evidence. So like if a scientist could confirm it in a lab some way, testable predictions, he wouldn't simply consider that testimonial. Would he be like, this is something worth more than simply the testimony of somebody?
Well, he doesn't really consider that, but it would be testimonial evidence, because unless you're the scientist doing it yourself, if you say, well, I've tested this in my lab, and this is what I report, I found that the event occurred, pretty well all of what we believe in science is ultimately based on testimony from people whom we trust. So, for example, if I say that I think that physicists have established the existence of the Higgs boson particle, my justification for accepting that will be testimony. And indeed, the justification for most scientists accepting it will be testimony. to the effect that, well, we did this and that we can replicate it. But no scientist ever replicates more than a very, very small fraction of what he believes to be scientific.
Right, because I would think that Hume accepted a lot of the scientific data at the time period, and he didn't do the tests himself. I'm for sure.
Yes. Yeah.
So I believe in my eyes, I see that as different than testimonial evidence, even though it's coming from the words of a scientist or whatever, and it is literally a testimony, because the quality of evidence is something that is put through the scientific method, which has a peer review process of many people testing it out and verifying it to be able to falsify a claim. So if testimony was false, you'd expect contravening testimonies of the other scientists as opposed to confirmatory ones. And because we have this reliable methodology, it seems more trustworthy than simply testimony. And so in this case, if Hume was like me, I would imagine he would make a distinction between simply testimony of miracles versus repeatably verifiable testimony of some kind that could in principle be tested.
Well, I think what you're getting at is when we have testimony from people we consider reliable, and when it's testimony from more than one person from a group of people, we trust it more. But I would argue it's still testimony.
My question is more from Hume's perspective. Would Hume still consider it the same as the kind of testimony he's talking about? Because I would say probably not. I think that the kind of testimony he's talking about is more like historical testimony or something, like just someone wrote down they had some experience, as opposed to someone giving a concise methodology of how to verify this experience from any perspective in the world, kind of a thing. I would think Hume would consider these different, which is why he would be skeptical of miracle claims, but not skeptical of archaeology or something.
Well, I think you're maybe getting at what's known as the demarcation problem. We can talk of historical science and operational science or normal science. Archaeology is a historical science. You can't, when you identify something as an arrowhead from a certain culture, you can't go into the laboratory and perform you can't go in and repeat, because you're talking about a historical artifact. Now Hume would I think Hume is pretty rigorous. I think he would admit that the laws of nature, his acceptance of them is ultimately based on testimony. But he's going to say that the amount of testimony for the laws of nature plus his own experience justifies them. But you asked what my position was, and I think that Hume's argument is something of a red herring, in that it depends on the claim that the evidence for the laws of nature is at conflict with the evidence for miracles. So getting this balance of probabilities argument going depends on the two bodies of evidence being in conflict with one another. And what I would argue is that they're not in conflict with one another. The laws of nature do not by themselves tell us what will happen in the world. As an illustration, if an apple is falling from a tree and I reach out my hand and catch it, I've not violated the law of gravity. I'm simply an intervening cause. Similarly, if I throw something up in the air, I haven't violated the law of gravity. The law is operating at all times. I'm simply an intervening cause. So God can produce a miracle not by violating the laws of nature, but by being an intervening cause. As an example, suppose you were going to be playing a game of billiards, and as you line up to make your shot, just as you do that, as you're making your shot, I roll another ball onto the table. The chances are I will change what would otherwise have happened, but at no moment will I have violated Newton's laws of motion. So God can produce a miracle without ever violating the laws. And the importance of that, the implication of that, is that you can't oppose the evidence for a miracle to the evidence for the laws of nature. And if you can't oppose those two bodies of evidence, then the rational thing to do, unless you have reason to think that a posteriori that the evidence, the testimonial evidence is bad, then the rational thing to do is accept both bodies of evidence.
Well, how could God be like an intervening force via the laws of nature? Like, obviously, he could change gravity in some way to make the apple fall faster or sooner or something, but that seems like it would, in fact, be an intervention breaking the laws of nature, because in order to change gravity in this one instance
No, I
would
haven't said he
require.
changes gravity. He doesn't change gravity. When I reach out and catch the falling apple, I have not changed the law of gravity. I've simply an intervening cause. So, no, my position doesn't require God in any way to alter the laws of nature.
Well, that's what I'm asking about. What is God doing that qualifies as a miracle in this instance? Is it something like, if this was already predetermined at the origin of the creation of the universe, kind of a thing, where he just set it in motion so this would happen at a convenient time? Or is it more like he's changing the psychology of the individual to make them do something? What
Well,
exactly is God doing that qualifies as a miracle in this example?
well, take as a test case. Um, in the New Testament, we have a record of Jesus multiplying loaves and fishes, or God multiplying loaves and fishes. Um, so God could perform a miracle simply by creating more of the stuff that makes up the fish. So God could create a fish that had no prior history. Going forward, it would obey all the laws of nature. It would go stale. It would break down. But its origin um, would not be the same way a fish usually arrives in the world. But going forward, it's going to obey all the laws of nature.
Well, wouldn't the creation of a fish potentially be a violation of physics there? Or are you saying he did something like quantum mechanics where random things pop into existence out of nothing kind of stuff?
Nope, I'm not making reference to quantum mechanics. Perhaps what you're thinking is that maybe the scenario that I suggest would violate the principle of the conservation of energy, the first law of thermodynamics.
Potentially. I mean, I guess if you had enough energy in the area, like using sunlight or something, you could do that.
Well, no,
So,
I'm
but
saying ex nihilo, that
ex nihilo.
God, ex nihilo, God can, according to theism, at the moment of creation, God created matter out of nothing. Um, the suggestion I'm making that miracles would be little acts of creation. So God could create more matter. And when we talk of laws of nature as explaining things, they only explain things in conjunction with a set of initial conditions and on the assumption that there's no intervening cause. Um, so God, by altering the conditions to which the laws apply, can bring about an event uh, that violates no laws of nature, yet is something that nature would not produce on its own.
Because I think Hume would interpret that as a violation of the laws of nature, in that the laws of nature are going in some direction, and God essentially creates a bubble where the laws of nature as they were going are no longer going. So if God creates a new fish or something, the laws of nature which were governing the air particles, the water particles, the gravitational particles of that location would now have to be affected by this new thing which was not there prior, which seems like it would be a violation of the laws of physics.
Well, no. What law of physics have I violated? When I reach out and catch that apple,
The
I have not
law of
violated a
the
law of physics.
uniformity, so
If
uniformity of
God,
nature.
if God creates an apple on a tree, what law of nature has he violated? I think you'll find the only plausible candidate will be the principle of the conservation of energy.
Well, why not like uniformity of nature or something along those lines? Where, because if we think gravity is affecting the Earth because it has a mass of X, and then you say +1 to the mass by adding a fish or something, you've now changed the gravitational force. That would be essentially no different than literally just increasing the gravitational force with a little dial in God's hands or whatever, which would be a violation of the laws of physics. And so, why would adding in new mass, which would increase the gravitational effect of this location, be any different than literally just increasing the gravitational force in that location by switching a dial? I wouldn't see the difference there.
You haven't changed the law of gravity. The law of gravity will still be the inverse square law. What you've done is you've provided more of the material to which the law of gravity applies. But you haven't changed the law of gravity. The law of gravity will still be that the force is consistent with the inverse square law.
But wouldn't that violate lots of the laws of physics? Because it seems like
It doesn't violate any of them. It may arguably violate the principle of the conservation of energy if you understand that principle as saying energy can neither be created nor destroyed.
Yeah. And the second law, entropy, things always move to disorder rather than order.
The second law is the law of entropy. That would be.
Well, because if you're generating like a fish or something in the location, you would need some kind of external energy source in order that is expending a greater amount of energy than it takes to composite the fish or something. Because otherwise, you're generating something from no prior loss of energy, which would then be a violation of the second law because it's not going from order to disorder. It's just going order pops out of nothing.
Well, let's get to the second law after we deal with the first law. The second law, the first law is sometimes interpreted as energy can neither be created nor destroyed. And alternatively, it's expressed as in an isolated system, the amount of energy remains constant. Okay. Now, just before I go there, you said an alternative energy source. Energy would not be transferred from anywhere if God creates energy. It would simply be created. Okay, so it's not like there'd have to be some pool of energy in some otherworldly place that we transfer some over. Okay. Now, as regards those two interpretations of the first law, historically, people have confused them and thought they are logically equivalent. In fact, they're not. The claim that energy can neither be created nor destroyed would a priori rule out theism. In fact, it would a priori rule out Big Bang cosmology.
I wouldn't see. I don't follow that part because
if energy can neither be created nor destroyed, and the universe is made of energy, then it could not have come into existence. If energy can neither be created nor destroyed, it can't come into existence. But we know that the universe has come into existence.
Well, I think most typical theories in physics say that it's a fluctuation of a previously existing something, quantum field, string theory, multiverse, whatever. So it didn't come into existence ex nihilo. The energy was already there. It's just displacement or something. But
I don't think you're correct there, Tom. The Big Bang theory is usually taken to mean that space, time, energy, and matter have an absolute beginning.
Ours, not all. So, like, if you go to the most recent poll I know of is a snapshot of foundational attitudes towards quantum mechanics by Schlosshauser. I think that's how you pronounce his name. And there's a questionnaire about what origin of the Big Bang and what's the consensus view of the origin of the Big Bang. It's like 40% multiverse or many worlds, and then like 10% string theory or something. None of them say Big Bang, like the origin of literally everything as the Big Bang is like 0%. Like nobody thinks
We're
that.
going to have to agree to disagree on that because I can give you all sorts of references. And I think the majority opinion is, in fact, that the universe had an absolute beginning.
Well, I think by that they mean our universe, not literally all natural stuff.
Well, it's off our topic, but if you're going to start to talk about the multiverse, one, we have no empirical evidence for it, and two, people like Robin Collins have argued that you would have to have a multiverse generator, which would be finely tuned to talk about a multiverse. So you would know the Bohr-Millikan
Board, yeah,
theory
Guth Lincoln, yeah, Board
that
Guth Lincoln.
any expanding universe has an absolute beginning, and
Well,
that's pretty
that's
well accepted.
here it is. Well, no, like there's actually I have a video I can show it to you if you want of the Lincoln and Guth specifically saying that the Board Guth Lincoln theorem shows nothing other than the fact the expansion had a beginning. It doesn't say anything about the universe itself
Any
having a
what
beginning.
it says, what the theorem says, is any expanding universe has an absolute beginning.
No, that's the false thing. So I have video of Guth and Lincoln, which I'm happy to pull up and show you, of them specifically saying that is incorrect. What it does say is that the expansion had a beginning.
I can give you a quote from Millikan too, so maybe we'll have to agree to disagree. But I have a quote from him saying it's any of this.
Well, I literally have him on video for a interview specifically on this topic of it being used in the context of the Kalam Cosmological, where he was specifically asked, "Is what the theists say in this context the correct application?" And he says no. And I'll try and find it.
Well, he doesn't like the Kalam argument, but he certainly agrees that any universe that is expanding has an absolute beginning. Now, the question of whether God is the cause of that is a different question.
I don't think so. I'm pretty sure that's literally not what he believes.
Well, I can pull up. It may take me some time, but I can pull up quotations from him.
Please do. I'll find mine, and we can.
I'll see if shall we see if we can find it.
Yeah, I'm on mine, looking for mine right now.
Okay, just let me see if I can find it.
How do you spell Lincoln? Lincoln. F-E. 1, 2, 3, 4. Transcripts. P. There it is. All right, put that there. Put this here. And share screen. Share screen. Share audio. Can you see my screen just to check? Picture of a YouTube face, redhead.
I'm not sure whether I can. I'll look at yours and then I'll come back to my screen.
Oh, okay. As long as you can hear it, that's fine. Just let me know if you can hear it.
Abandoning its belief in the applicability of the Penrose-Hawking theorem, Kalam advocates switched to a newer theorem known as the Borda-Guth and Vilenkin theorem.
Can you hear that? Can you chat? Can you guys hear that?
Yep.
Okay, cool.
In 2003, Arvin Bord, Alan Guth, and Alexander Vilenkin were able to prove that any universe, which is on average in a state of cosmic expansion throughout its history, cannot be infinite in the past, but must have a past space-time boundary. What makes their proof so powerful is that it holds regardless of the physical description of the very early universe. So in fact, the Bord-Guth-Vilenkin theorem does imply an absolute beginning of the universe.
I was working with Arvin Borda and Alex Vilenkin to understand what we can learn about how inflation might have started and how far back it could have gone. And in particular, once we realized that inflation could be eternal into the future, it seemed like a very natural question to ask. Could inflation have also been eternal into the past? And what we found was that inflation could not be eternal into the past. What we basically managed to achieve was proving a theorem which says that any expanding region of space-time that has some minimum expansion rate can only go back so far and not infinitely far. So that means that inflation must have had a beginning. It doesn't really say that the universe must have had a beginning, but it says that the universe could not have been expanding forever up until the present time.
So we interviewed by Ashtekar, and in their model they have a bouncing universe, and they said, well, that means the universe could be eternal in the past, and that theorem doesn't prevent that. Is that right?
Yeah, that is right.
The theorem proves that inflation must have a beginning, right? The universe as a whole, the theorem doesn't say that. It says that the expansion of the universe must have a beginning, right? So, but it opens the door somewhat for alternatives.
As we've
So that was both Guth and Vilenkin specifically saying it does not say the universe has a beginning. It's just the inflation.
Okay, let me here is the quotation from Vilenkin. He writes, "We have no viable models of an eternal universe. The BGV theorem gives us reason to believe that such models simply cannot be constructed." And he goes on to note, "The theorem is sweeping in its generality. It makes no assumptions about gravity or matter. Gravity may be attractive or repulsive, light rays may converge or diverge, and even general relativity may decline. The theorem would still hold." In his book, Many Worlds in One, The Search for Other Universes, this is 2006, he writes, "With the BGV proof now in place, cosmologists can no longer hide behind the possibility of a past eternal universe. There is no escape. They have to face the problem of a cosmic beginning." And that's found on page 176.
Well, I believe by that he means the models. The models don't. I agree the models don't work. We don't have any models that actually work. But when it talks
So there
about...
are no models there are no cosmological models that work without a beginning of the universe?
Well, no, they don't work as in there's no models that accurately describe the evidence we see in physics and can answer the questions in physics such that they are acceptable models to actually say might be something that describes the fundamental nature of reality. They're just generalized guesses, more or less. Nobody thinks that any of the models in physics are like really good at describing reality. But that doesn't mean that there isn't a beginning. It just means the models don't work yet. We're just very young models that don't have enough data.
But then you're giving me a promissory note. What Vilenkin was saying in that quote is that we have no evidence for a past eternal universe.
Sort of, but there's no evidence against it either. That's the point.
I think that he says no to that, Tom.
Well, I did just show a recent clip of him last year admitting this
And I
on camera.
just read you a quote where he says there are no past eternal universes on our best evidence. Now,
Well, in that
you may
book,
say, well, as further evidence comes in, maybe they will allow you to say what you want to say, but that's a promissory note. That's not our best science. In addition, you have the second law, which says that energy gets more evenly dispersed in the universe. If you had an infinitely old universe, you would have a universe that was presumably at all the same temperature. It isn't, which says it hasn't had long enough for the second law to run its course. So I mean, we're getting off the topic of divine intervention, but you know, I'm happy to go head to head with you on the scientific evidence there.
Yeah, I would love to get Valenkin in here to confirm which position he says, because I'd be willing to bet a significant portion of money I'm right on this, since I've emailed him and specifically asked him about this. But
yes, and I'm giving you a quote from Valenkin, and I can give you all sorts of quotes from other astrophysicists who are saying that the Big Bang is best interpreted as an absolute beginning to the universe. So neither one of us is an expert in the area. So I guess we're going to have to go with dueling experts.
Sure, but I'd say that from my research, the consensus leans in my direction and the BGV leans in my direction, and I'd bet money on it.
And guess what I would say?
Yeah.
From my research, the consensus goes in my direction. So I don't know that we're going to solve this in 5 minutes today, but I'm happy to give references.
Sure.
Yeah.
So back to the topic of God's intervention and which laws of physics it violates. If God does, say, generate a fish from nothing at any particular point in space, it seems to create a bubble in that it affects the laws of physics differently. The laws of physics are now in a different trajectory than they were previously.
But I can affect the laws of physics the same way by human agency without violating the laws.
Well, I would consider that a violation. I think Hume would probably also consider that a violation. I don't think there is such a thing. I don't think there's
what
any
laws
free will.
violated?
Well, if you were able to manipulate the laws of physics and change their trajectory in some way.
I'm not manipulating the laws. I'm changing the conditions to which they apply.
Right. So like if you're,
and
you
we
have
do
to
that
use,
constantly. Like when we build a building, we change the conditions to which the laws of nature apply, but we don't say that we violated the laws of nature.
Right. So if you use one law to interfere with another, you're not violating any laws.
But I'm not using one law to interfere with another.
Well, that's why I would disagree. I'd say that all human actions are using one law, just electromagnetic or the.
So you want to say that it's true by definition that mind-body dualism is false?
No, I'd say that's the best evidence we have is that the most supported position, but I would imagine Hume would consider that a violation if we could use our free will to do stuff in the universe. That would also qualify as kind of like a miracle that we don't have evidence for. And so I don't think you can use that as evidence to support the position against Hume.
But our discussion is on whether we can have evidence for miracle. You can't begin by saying that. And a question I would have for you, do you want to claim that a priori we can know that God doesn't exist?
No.
No. So you would want to say, presumably, that we're not simply uttering a contradiction if we say that God created the universe.
Right.
Okay. So there could be evidence in favor of that.
Sure.
We were just disagreeing over whether there is, but there could be evidence in principle.
Oh yeah, absolutely. I would say that.
Okay. Yeah.
Like give an example. I would say that if you could give a novel testable prediction, that would count as evidence.
If God were to create the universe, the space-time nexus that we have, would he have violated any law?
Yes, I think he would have literally pooped him out of nothingness.
But it wouldn't be out of nothingness. If God creates ex nihilo, he makes something other than himself.
Right.
So are you saying that's logically impossible?
No, I think that'd be a violation of the laws of physics, though, because there aren't any laws of physics that
But
can
there
do
aren't
that.
any laws of, what are the laws of physics before there's a universe?
There aren't any.
Well, there it is. So God wouldn't be violating any laws of nature in creating a universe.
Well, I think by violating a law of nature here, it means doing something the laws of nature can't do.
But that is that's a definition of a law that I don't think any you'll find in any physics book. Where have you ever seen a law of nature stated that way?
Well, be a violation would be the thing I'm defining, not the law part. The violation of a law would be doing
But
something laws of physics can't do.
we've just talked about that I can alter what will happen without violating any laws.
Only by using other forces is the consensus. I
Well,
believe.
no, you've just said that it's logically possible for God to have created the universe.
Sure.
If God could create the whole universe, which is a collection of mass and energy, if that's not logically impossible, then you can't claim that doing it on a smaller level is logically impossible.
Right. I never said either was logically
But
impossible.
then,
But
if he didn't violate in
just
the
clarify,
first place,
I
he hasn't
claim both of
violated in
those
the
are
second place.
violations. I claim both of those are violations of physics, but it's not logically impossible to violate physics.
But you haven't told me what violation of physics it would be.
Doing something that no law of physics can do would be a violation of the laws of physics.
But you've just said it's logically possible before there's any
Yes.
laws of physics for God to have created the universe.
Yes, which is doing something none of the laws of physics can do, and therefore it would be a violation of the laws of physics.
I think you're using a arbitrary, like a very strange definition of a law. Like, how does that relate to when we say the law of gravity is the inverse square law?
Well, I'm
Like-
defining violation here. I'm not defining law. I'm just using the classical definition of law, but I'm defining what a violation would be. A violation of a law of physics. Just use the classical definitions of laws of
But I
physics.
haven't violated anything if I cause, like, the laws by themselves don't tell us anything about what will happen in the world. If you've got a parking lot and you've got Newton's laws of motion, say, that doesn't tell you what's going to happen on the parking lot on an icy day. You'd have to have cars there. You have to have a set of initial conditions. And unless you have the conditions to which the laws apply, all you have are conditionals. If that you have this if-then statements. If there are two masses, they will attract each other.
I'm not quite understanding your objection here. So, like, if I created a new law of physics tomorrow, snapped my fingers, made a new law of physics, and added it to the rest of them, do you think Hume and most philosophers, most scientists would consider that a violation of the laws of physics, creating new laws?
But you're talking as if laws are somehow out there independently of that to which they apply.
Well, sort of. I think like a law is a representation of some kind of quantum field and how it interacts and governs the universe. And so I could create a new quantum field that has some nature that causes a new kind of interaction between things, and that I could describe with a law. And so if I created a new quantum field, which would then apply to have this new effect, which could then be described by a law, I'll be creating a new law of physics. And if I did that, that would seem like a violation of the laws of physics from the definition of most philosophers and scientists, I would imagine.
If there was no physical universe, would there be any laws of nature?
No, but I don't think that's relevant to the question here. So the question here is, imagine we're in the laws of physics today, and today I created a new law of physics. I just created a new fundamental force of nature or something, and with the quantum fields, however they work. Would that be a violation of the laws of physics?
And what's the relevance of that question to our discussion?
Because if creating a new law now would be a violation, creating all of the laws at the beginning would also be a violation.
So if God creates laws, he's violating them?
Yes, because that's not one of the laws of physics. Creating new laws isn't a law of physics.
If God creates a law, then he's violated that law? That seems very strange for you to say.
Well, so if there was no laws of physics and then God added a law of physics, then that would be violating the nature of reality, which did not have laws of physics, by adding in a new one. And that would be a violation of whatever laws governed reality prior to the laws of physics, which would then be a violation of the laws of whatever you want to call reality. So yes.
But the laws of nature would come into being at the same time God created the universe. Okay?
Right. So
prior, but I think we're straight. Like, my argument is that God's performing a miracle doesn't require a new law. It doesn't require violating old laws. If God creates ex nihilo a rock, that rock is going to obey all the laws of nature. It's just there's more of reality for which the laws to apply. Now, the only law that I know of that possibly would come into claim that it's violated is the principle of the conservation of energy. And it's stated in two ways. One, that energy can neither be created nor destroyed. And two, in an isolated system, energy is conserved. Now, my point is that those two expressions are not logically equivalent. The claim that energy can neither be created nor destroyed is a far stronger statement, and in fact would rule out theism a priori. So we have to decide which version of the law we should accept. And to the degree that it's supported by scientific evidence, it's the claim that energy in an isolated system is conserved that has the strongest evidential support. All that any experiment can show you, or series of experiments, is that in a specific instance, energy is conserved. Now, you might want to ask, or you might want to claim, well, to claim that energy can neither be created nor destroyed is to give a deep structural understanding of the fact that we find in experiments that energy is conserved to the degree that the system is isolated. But that's not going to work very well. One, and we've just had this argument, so maybe we'll agree to disagree on it, but our best cosmology suggests that the universe had an absolute beginning. But two, the only evidence you would have for the claim that energy can neither be created nor destroyed is that you've never observed it being created or destroyed. But precisely if you observe a miracle, you would have evidence for energy being created or destroyed. So to claim that to claim the first law as an objection, to claim that energy can neither be created nor destroyed as an objection to miracle, is akin to saying, well, there are no mice in the house. And I say, why? And you say, well, there's no evidence of mice. And then I say, but I found some mice scat. And then you say, well, we've already established there couldn't be any mice in the house. And I say, why? And you say, there's no evidence for them. And I say, but look, here's evidence for them. And you say, no, there couldn't be evidence for them because we've already established that. So the scientific form of the principle of the conservation of energy is that to the degree that a system is causally isolated, energy will be conserved. Now, the believer in miracle doesn't deny that form of the principle. What the believer in miracle denies is that the system is causally isolated. So what the believer in miracle is saying, yes, I can agree that energy will be conserved in an isolated system, but I don't agree that the universe is in fact causally isolated from the possibility of divine intervention. So if we have events that seem to involve the addition of mass or energy, they would be evidence that there is divine intervention. So you can't use the law understood as energy can neither be created nor destroyed as a reason to reject that, because our only reason for accepting that energy can neither be created nor destroyed is that we've never observed it. Now, arguably, our best science leads back to it was, if we accept what I'm saying about the Big Bang theory, but in any event, it can't be used to rule out a priori discussions of, reports of what looked like a miracle.
So if I granted your argument that the Big Bang was in fact evidence of some violation of the laws of physics.
No, I'm not. You're not granting my. That's not my claim.
Well, so by my definition, if the laws of physics were created, that would be a violation. So by my definition, that would be a violation. But you don't have to accept that. But I'm just using my terminology here. So if I granted that was the case, then I would say, fine, that could definitely be evidence of miracles. And so you could no longer use the laws of physics to rule out miracles. So if you're correct that the beginning of the universe is evidence of somehow a change of physics,
or energy or evidence that energy was created
well, that would be a change in physics, because I'm granting the first definition of the conservation of energy. Energy can't be created or destroyed. So if we have evidence that energy was created, like at the Big Bang, then that would be a violation of the first law of physics by my definition, because it says
no,
it can't.
It would not, because the first law says in an isolated system. And what the theist is denying is that you have an isolated system. Look, here might be an analogy. If I have a box and I put in $20 in the box, and then I leave the box in a room, and I say, look, if this box has no outside intervention, the $20 will be there when I come back. Okay. I come back and the $20 isn't there. I don't say I was wrong in asserting that if the box is an isolated system, the $20 will still be there. Rather, I'm saying there was an outside cause intervened. Okay. But my statement that if the box is an isolated system, the $20 will still be there is entirely correct in either case. What I'm denying is that the universe is a causally isolated system. I'm quite happy.
I'm taking the system here of universe plus God. So if you have universe and God,
yes,
or just God, God is the system, and then God creates the universe.
No, God is not the system. The theist is going to say that the universe is a distinct entity, different from God.
Well, no, I grant that. So there's multiple variables in a system. So system here is just all the different variables we're looking at. So if we look at all of the variables of reality, say at the beginning of the Big Bang, there's God and the universe. Prior to that, there was just God. And then God created the universe. So he created energy. And if he didn't create it out of himself, like a battery, then he created it out of nothing.
Well,
right?
he made something. So he didn't have to have something to make it, but he didn't take some nothing and make something out of it.
Well, he's creating energy from nothing, right? Is that no? Because I don't think he's like taking a part of himself and just forming it into the universe. He's making energy from nothing. So that would be a violation of the first law, wouldn't it?
No, there was no energy prior to God making it.
Right. So if that happened, that would be a violation of the first law. It'd be the first law is wrong.
No, the first law in any kind of scientific justification is that our observation is that in a causally isolated system, energy is conserved. It doesn't say anything about reality before there was energy. What it says is when you have energy, if it's in a system that is causally isolated, that energy will be conserved. That says nothing about whether something external to the system could bring energy into the system or create energy.
Well, so system here means anything, literally anything equals system. So God equals system.
Well, no, God is not a physical object that's part of the system.
Well, this doesn't say anything about physical objects. Energy in this context is simply defined as ability to change, to make change of any kind. And so God is a system, and God's ability to create the universe is energy of some kind. He has the ability to make change. And so
No,
him,
that's going to make God energy, which no theist is going to accept.
right, but we have no evidence of anything but energy. There's no evidence of a non-energy thing. So that
Well,
seems like,
no, you're begging the question there.
what?
You're begging the question there. We would have to have a discussion on all sorts of issues. If mind-body dualism is true,
Consensus
then
says
there would be
no.
something other. If theism is true, like you can't expect me just to give you that the only thing we have any evidence of is energy.
Well, in physics, the only evidence of if anything we have is energy.
But
There's no,
physics only studies what is physical.
it's because that's all it has to study. It has nothing. Like if there was
Right,
another
but
force,
that doesn't suggest that there are not other realities to which you would have to have a different approach. And
right? But so
if our best science, if indeed our best science does point to an absolute beginning of the universe, that suggests that physics is in some sense incomplete.
right. So I would agree with that, but that seems like if physics is incomplete, that's a violation of physics. So I would be happy to admit
No,
that.
it's not. It's not a violation. It simply says it's incomplete. Like the fact that biology is incomplete doesn't mean that it's somehow a violation of something.
Well, so like physics says energy will be conserved, and if energy isn't conserved at any point,
No,
then,
physics says energy will be conserved in an isolated system.
sure. So
That's
energy will
what
be
it says.
conserved in an isolated system. Then you have if you have an isolated system that doesn't do that, that would be a violation of physics.
But that would be. But the denial of the person who believes in miracle is that you don't have an isolated system.
Well, an isolated system here would mean all of reality. Everything that exists is an isolated system. Includes
Well,
God,
no,
includes everything.
you can't put God as a system. Like God is not just another piece of the universe. Like God exists in a different mode than matter. God exists necessarily. The theist will say other things exist contingently.
So I believe every physicist would agree that's a violation of physics. Like that's like just in the definition. Like if you have something,
I can give you all sorts of physicists that don't agree with that. Luke Barnes would be one. Like the physicist is not entitled a priori to claim that all of reality is physics. That's an a priori claim.
all right. So that part
And if
I
you
agree
don't
with.
think something can come from nothing, then the Big Bang poses that there must be something other than the universe to cause it. Unless you're going to say you can have the whole shebang come into existence on cost.
Right. I believe that's why the consensus is that the universe came from a multiverse or many worlds or a string theory. But
then you're into the problem that we had the discussion with Vilenkin. He says no.
Well, I believe all the evidence is on my side of that one, and I can literally prove that. I can literally prove that I'm correct on this topic.
And I could say that I can say the same thing. I could say that, so it doesn't help you there to say I know this. I can equally say I know this. I'm happy to give you dueling experts, and I think that I can claim I know that the consensus will turn out to be on my side.
It would be this. I would love to have the opportunity to just call the Lincoln and ask him, and then just be like, "Oh, okay, let's solve this one right now."
Did you say that? Yes. And of course, we'd have to talk to all sorts of other expert cosmologists who say the Big Bang clearly implies an absolute beginning.
Yeah, no, I just saw the polls that.
Yeah. Do you know the book that William Lane Craig, and I'm not sure whether it was Quentin Smith, somebody else did, but it was Theism and Big Bang Cosmology. And in that, it's older now. It was Oxford University Press. In that book, I think it's Quentin Smith, but I could be wrong on that. But he says, look, non-theist philosophers, atheist philosophers want to say, well, maybe you could have a universe before that somehow it was always existing. And he says, that's simply not an option. And as an atheist, he feels it's necessary on the basis of analogy with quantum mechanics to say you can have a totally uncaused event. And that's his defense of how we escape the Callum argument. But note that as a professional philosopher of science, he finds it necessary to go that route rather than to say we can have a past eternal universe.
Right, I agree. Like that's a very well established conclusion based on quantum mechanics that randomness is a fundamental force in physics, based on the no-go theorem. So I agree that's a rational interpretation based on evidence. I don't think it's the
Well,
consensus
it's
view.
his option. Now then you're saying that you can get something out of nothing if you take that option.
Right. That's why I was mentioning quantum mechanics earlier. Like if you're invoking quantum mechanics to get a fish, I'm like, yeah, that would not be a violation of physics. I agree on that one.
Well, no, I'm not, but I'm invoking God as a cause.
Right.
And if you think you can get a fish that way, why are you ruling out getting God that way? God getting the fish that way.
Oh, I'm not. That's why I said at the beginning, if you're saying that God created a fish using the already existing laws of quantum mechanics, then that part I could potentially accept as a non-violation of the laws of physics.
No, but it's he doesn't need to fiddle with the laws at all.
Well, that's the part I'm thinking that would probably be by Hume's definition of violation. I'm pretty like I wish we could ask him, but I think Hume would be like, yeah, that's a violation. That is literally what I mean by a violation.
I think if we could ask Hume, it might embarrass your position.
It'd be a fun experiment. We're gonna resurrect Hume. Can you
But
like
it's
create a
pretty
god,
well,
resurrect
it's pretty
Hume?
well known in the literature, and here I do speak with expertise rather than relying on anybody else, is that it's Hume did not have a well-developed account of what a law of nature is. So Hume gives us no criteria by which to distinguish between a regularity and a law. So, for example, Hume says it's a law of nature that dead men don't come back. Well, you won't find that law in any textbook. Right. And suppose you had a case where someone was clinically dead, and we perform
CDR.
We perform an operation, and the person comes back. We wouldn't say a law of nature had been violated.
Right.
We would talk about an intervening cause.
I would agree there, but I'm not seeing like I would say that the general regularities.
Suppose instead of the human intervening and bringing back the dead person, God intervenes and brings back the dead person. Equally, no law of nature needs to be violated.
Well,
if I don't violate a law of nature in bringing about something that nature would not otherwise produce, then clearly God need not.
Well, this is why I brought up the example of like, if I could create a new law of physics, would that be a violation? I'd say yes, unless I was already using other laws of physics to do this, then me simply creating a new law of physics would be a violation.
Laws of nature don't do anything in the sense of they're standing over and making something happen. Rather, laws supervene on causal powers. So what happens is masses attract one another, and they do so in a regular manner that we're able to develop an equation. Okay, but it's not like there's a law of gravity outside of things that is saying to the thing, okay, you move over and do this.
Right,
okay?
I agree.
If God creates more of something, then of course the laws apply. Fish that were created, they will obey all the laws of nature going forward in history. What they don't have is the causes that usually lead to a fish existing. They have a different cause of their existing.
So I understand a law. When anyone says a law, they mean a pattern in the nature of a quantum field. So it is a literal physical thing. Anytime anybody says law of physics, it is a physical thing, which is a pattern in a quantum field. So it's literally an existing thing. So if I was going to create a law of physics, that means I created a quantum field with a pattern. And that would be the creation of a law. So I obviously don't think laws are platonic objects or something, or some kind of abstract ideals. I think every law is a physical pattern in a quantum field. And so if I created a new law, that would be creating a new quantum field or new pattern in the quantum field that interacted in the world and did something.
So suppose we create a further quantum field
Yeah.
Are we going to have new laws of nature? No, we'll have
Yes.
the laws that govern quantum fields.
No, because what governs quantum fields are their nature. And so depending on how you define
But
its nature
if
would
God
be a new
creates a
law.
quantum field that has
Yeah.
the same nature as another quantum field, that quantum field is going to behave in the same way.
Right.
Okay, so if God creates a fish ex nihilo, that fish is going to behave in the same way as other fish. It will just have a different immediate origin than usual fish. Okay, God
Right.
would simply
That part doesn't.
God would simply be doing on a small scale what he did on a large scale in the creation of the world.
But again, both of those, by any definition of pretty much everybody I know, is that's a violation. So I would say if you're going to create a law of physics, that is a violation of physics.
But you haven't explained why it is.
Because I think that a violation of physics is doing anything the known laws of physics cannot do.
But
the laws of physics that have
laws
been
of
enacted.
physics by themselves don't do anything.
Well, that's,
Like
I'm saying they do. I'm saying they 100%
they
do.
describe how matter behaves.
No, I'm
If
saying
you
the
have
laws of physics are quantum fields. They literally do things. All of the laws. When anytime anyone says law, it is a literally doing something.
What quantum fields do things.
Right.
Quantum fields do things.
Yes.
So if God makes another quantum field, it will do the things that quantum fields do. But he won't have violated the laws of quantum fields. Nothing in how quantum fields behave tells us that we couldn't have another quantum field of a similar nature. Nothing in how matter behaves says we could not have more matter. That is what takes us back to this first principle that, I've given you the argument for.
Right. So I'm trying to translate.
Maybe a question that will help us here is, why is violation then a big deal to you, if that's how you're understanding violation?
Why is violation a big deal to me? So it's not a big
violation
deal to me?
is a loaded term. Okay, to violate something is to harm it. So when you say, you give me your understanding of what a violation is, it doesn't seem to me. It seems to me be riding on some idea that a violation is a bad thing. But given how you understand violation, why would we be worried?
Well, I don't consider violations a bad thing. I just consider them an unlikely thing. So
but we have lots of unlikely things that happen.
Sure, I'm not.
It's unlikely that the Earth will be hit by an asteroid, but that doesn't make it a violation of the law.
Right. So I would say that the probability of a violation of a law is so low that to think that that happened is a bad conclusion. So I would agree with Hume in this case, that if we consider the possibility of a violation of the laws versus the possibility of someone had a delusion, the delusion is always going to be a better explanation here.
Well, now we're back to Hume, and this is what I will. No, I don't think so, because one, you're confusing two things concerning probability. An event which is improbable in terms of prediction need not be improbable in terms of somebody noting that it indeed occurred. So, for example, winning the lottery, the probability of being able to predict that is pretty low, but we don't require much evidence to be persuaded that somebody in fact did win the lottery.
I agree.
So, your winning the lottery is really, really improbable. But
unfortunately,
if somebody gives me testimony that you in fact did win the lottery, I don't require a huge amount of testimony to believe that happened.
Right. So I would agree, but I would say the analogy is more, if there is some phenomenon, you have testimony, someone said, I won the lottery. Is it more likely that that is a figment of someone's imagination, that they lied? Or is it more likely true that I won the lottery? And I'd say it's more likely that it's a figment. Most people.
So under no circumstances, if you tell me you won the lottery, I should believe you?
Well, I'd say there are circumstances, but it would
Okay,
be more
so
than just testimony.
more than testimony?
Yeah, like if you saw me driving a Ferrari, it'd be like, okay, now we got some evidence.
But look, do you accept all the time, I would suppose, that if the newspaper reports that somebody won the lottery, that's a reliable report. If you consider the newspaper reliable, you don't do what you just said that you would.
I don't trust the newspaper at all. I'm not big on modern media.
Well,
but let's say I did. Let's say I did. So if I trusted the newspaper and I trusted their reports, then I'd say it's reasonable to believe that person won the lottery. Yes. In the same reason, I would say if they saw, I don't know, a orangutan or something, I consider it reasonable. But if the newspaper posted somebody saw a unicorn, I'd say, nope, I would not believe it. There is 0% chance I would believe a newspaper that said somebody saw a unicorn.
But
the difference there is one of them is only made up of discovered properties, and one of them is made up of asserted properties that has no empirical basis. And so, like, people winning the lottery, like, yes, that happens all the time. We know that happens. So to say that someone did, while it's unlikely, there is still already an implicit basis of evidence for that. Whereas if we say someone saw a unicorn, zero implicit basis for that whatsoever.
Okay. Let me make a couple of points here. One, the criteria for establishing whether an unusual event occurred would be different than the criteria of what its cause is. Okay.
Sure.
You would agree?
Yep.
So you have to be careful, or a critic has to be careful in his or her argument, not to make the difficulty of being justified in recognizing unusual events to rule out naturalistic events that you would be inclined to accept on the basis of testimony.
Sure.
You don't want your argument to prove too much.
Right.
But determining whether an event occurred, that's a different question than whether we should call it a miracle.
Wait a minute. So that part I think I might disagree with. So like if we have an event that occurred, somebody saw a unicorn and they wrote it down. That could be caused by an actual unicorn existing, or it could be caused by a delusion in their brain. But I still consider the event occurred either way. The event occurred, they had an experience of some kind.
No. I'm not asking whether it's true that people thought they had this experience. We're talking about whether they in fact had that experience. Take as an example.
Because like the whole
take
point
as an
of my
example meteorites.
Yeah.
There was a time, indeed, the famous French astronomer Laplace, he refused to accept accounts of stones falling out of the sky because his theory had no room for it. And the only people reporting this were peasants. Now, we could ask your question, which is more likely, that the person is deluded or that they actually had a stone fall out of the sky and that's what they're reporting? Okay. Now, it doesn't take somebody with a PhD in physics to recognize being hit on the head with a stone, right?
Sure.
Equally, when I meet people, I'm pretty good at discerning whether they're alive or not.
Sure.
Okay. So supposing somebody reports to me and there's no reason to think that they're suffering from any kind of illness. There's no reason to think that their senses aren't in good shape. They report to me that they ascertained that somebody died, and then they meet the person 3 days later. Can we recognize when somebody's alive? Generally.
Yeah.
Can we recognize when somebody's dead? We can be pretty reliable about that. So the question then, if we accept the event, is what's its best explanation? But it won't do to say, well, if the best explanation is miracle, therefore we can't accept the event, because the question of whether we accept the event is a separate question from what's its cause. So stones falling out of the sky is a pretty unusual event. Unless we accept that event, we won't go in and ask what its cause is. Now, people who said the stone fell out of the sky and it's a miracle, they would be mistaken. But if they simply say the stone fell out of the sky, they could very well be right. The question is, what explanation do we give of the unusual event? So it won't do to say, well, if the unusual event would be most plausibly explained as a miracle, we can't accept it.
Right. So I would agree with that part, but I would say that if there is a more plausible explanation that we already have evidence for, then we should accept that explanation over the miracle.
Okay, and that's fair enough. So then we go to the question of what's the best explanation. Now we know that human agency can bring about events that nature would not otherwise produce, or that would not otherwise happen.
I think that's begging the question also.
Well,
like, I don't think we know that.
Will you give me any kind of agency?
I don't. I'm a determinist. I think that there's no free will.
But you would still, I mean, if you look at, if you come across Mount Rushmore, to use a hackneyed example, you're going to talk about some agent doing that. You're going to say there was some kind of intelligent agency involved.
Yeah, as long as we still assume that that's a result of physical forces acting on their brain or something.
But now you're begging the question.
Well, as a possibility, it's a possibility that it's just physical
possibility. Okay.
Yeah.
Now, suppose we were to establish. You're familiar with the story in the Gospel of John of the raising of Lazarus.
Yep.
Well, supposing we establish we have really good testimony that Lazarus was in fact dead. And suppose we have really good testimony that he is in fact, that he was later alive. Now, we have one set of issues around establishing that, but the separate question is, suppose we establish that, what's the best explanation?
Delusion.
Okay. And I would suggest that the best explanation there, if we've established that indeed it happened, is to appeal to some kind of intelligent agency. And
why would that be better than delusion?
Well, you're going back to the first question.
Well, I see those as, I think
they're
that
separate
delusion,
questions.
I don't see how they're separate questions, because
Well,
I see
it's the question of whether you are hit on the head with a rock falling out of the sky, separate from the question of whether that event has a natural explanation.
Sure, but I'm saying like the question here is
well, by analogy, this is the same issue. It's one thing to say.
I'm not seeing it. So help me on. I'm saying that if we take your example of Laplace, where people say they saw rocks falling out of the sky, I'd say Laplace is justified in saying, no, you probably had a delusion. If there's no background information that we have of us ever seen this occur, there's no testable predictions, there's no way to verify this, and we just have some testimony of a few people, then I'd say, nope, that's more likely a delusion. So even in the case of Laplace, or in the case of Lazarus, if we have lots of evidence of people having delusions, we have very little evidence of rocks falling or people rising, the more rational conclusion is to say those people had a delusion than to grant the conclusion that what they said actually occurred. And that would be the better explanation of the phenomenon.
Well, I disagree, because I presume you've never been hit on the head with a meteorite.
I assume so.
Yeah. And you've never seen a rock fall out of the sky.
I have seen a meteorite, but let's assume I haven't.
You've seen a trail of light across the sky, but you have not seen, I presume, a rock fall out of the sky.
Like literally all the way to the ground in front of my feet kind of a thing? No.
Yeah. So why do you believe that that happens? Testimony.
Testimony. More like
you've read about meteorites. You've had people testify to you that this is indeed what they've experienced. And you presume them to be honest. You presume them not to be deluded. Because I could run your same argument. I could say, well, you know, those scientists, they were just credulous.
Sure. But I'd say I don't care about the testimony at all. I don't care about anything anybody says. All I care about is, does it make
then you're going to limit. And this was a problem that plagued Hume, and he never satisfactorily got around it, that then you're limiting what you can believe to your own private experience.
Well, no, because I'm saying that novel testable predictions, if you can successfully predict things we don't know yet and get it right, if anybody can do that,
But
that's
you're
evidence.
believing that that's done based on testimony. You believe in meteorites based on the testimony of others.
Well, no, it's the testimony here is irrelevant. It's superfluous. They
No,
make a
it isn't.
testable
How did you
prediction.
come to believe in meteorites?
Right. So I can listen to someone's testimony that they made a testable prediction.
But then you're believing them that they made a testable prediction.
That part's irrelevant. The part that counts as evidence is, did they actually successfully make a testable prediction, yes or no? Now, whether I accept that on insufficient evidence doesn't matter. I don't care. What matters, what is the evidence? The only thing that counts as the evidence is, did they successfully make a novel testable prediction? And I can do this myself and say, if a meteorite happens, there's going to be a loud sound and if it hits the ground, it's going to cause a loud crater or whatever. And I can test that and go to the locations that have this and see if it occurs. So I can make novel testable predictions. But what I count as evidence is not ever the testimony. I don't care about what anything says.
But then you're going to be in trouble. Then you're going to be in trouble on historical science. Like, you're back to the demarcation problem, because there are things that you would presumably accept as scientific, and you would probably accept as, and that you would accept as being probably true, but they're not empirically testable.
Like what? So for mine, historical claims, I accept that
for example, we have hypotheses about what caused the great die-off of the dinosaurs.
Yep.
Now, you can't come back and, do a real life huge meteor striking the earth, killing off all the dinosaurs, and yet you accept that as being scientific. You may even accept it as being probably true. And you would be able to give reasons, but those reasons would be based on somebody saying, look, we've done this.
Well, I'd say that we have evidence of meteorites existing in reality. We have evidence of volcanoes existing in reality. So either of those are potential explanations of the dinosaurs die-off. Magical unicorns, magical leprechauns, don't have evidence of those, so those are not plausible explanations.
But have I said anything about magical unicorns or leprechauns? No. I'm
addressing your demarcation problems. The demarcation here that I'm saying is what makes a plausible explanation versus an implausible explanation is discovered properties versus asserted properties. So discovered properties are things that have been able to successfully make novel testable predictions, whether or not I know it. And asserted properties are things that have not been able to successfully make novel testable predictions, whether or not I know it. And so in this context, volcanoes and meteorites have successfully made novel testable predictions and all kinds of things in science. Whether or not I know it is irrelevant. And so those are good, plausible explanations of why the dinosaurs died.
But if you don't know it, on what basis are you saying that it's been done?
Well, again,
testimony.
So I don't, whether I know it is irrelevant here. I don't care if I know it. I can just be a brain in a vat. It makes no difference to me whether or not I know it.
But how do you know it is the question. How do you know it? You know it because people have told you, we've made these predictions.
I don't care. Pretend I don't. Pretend I don't know it. Pretend I know literally nothing. I was born 5 seconds ago. I know nothing. I can still say it's a valid explanation if it's been able to make novel testable predictions. It's not a valid explanation if it hasn't made novel testable predictions. So I don't care if I know it. All I need to say is, here is a demarcation of a good standard of evidence versus a bad standard of evidence. And the good standard of evidence is the ability to successfully predict the future. And a bad standard of evidence is not able to do that. And whether you do that via testimony or not, I don't care. Doesn't matter the means that you do this. I don't care.
But so you're going to insist that prediction equals explanation?
Be evidence. Prediction would be evidence.
Okay. But suppose suppose there's an instance where you can't predict what I will do, but nevertheless, there's a report that I did something. Are you going to say, well, that's not an explanation, the fact that I couldn't predict, but I later give a reason to you why I did it?
I'm not following, my ability to...
Do you know Richard Swinburne's distinction between personal explanation and law explanation?
Not very well, no.
Okay. We will often give an explanation of something we did that does not, that it was not predictable, but nevertheless it's accepted as an explanation of what we did.
Like the John Lennox bake the cake. Why did you bake the cake analogy?
I'm not sure I know Lennox, but I think it's in that line of argument.
Gotcha. So yeah, I would agree there, but I'd say that like I wouldn't say that I need to be able to predict your psychological motivations if those things have already been predicted in other instances. So if I say people like other people, so they bake cake or whatever, that's a past. We have lots of examples of that. So I could predict that if my mom loves me, she will bake a cake. I wake up on my birthday. Oh, there's a cake. That's a confirmatory, testable prediction that my mom loves me or something. And so I say you can make those kinds of testable predictions. Once you do, motivations like that are now an
But
acceptable.
what if it's this way? What if it's you're sure your mom loves you, but there's lots of things you like besides cake. Knowing that your mom loves you doesn't automatically enable you to predict that she's going to make you a cake.
Sure, I wouldn't. That wouldn't make a difference to me. I'm
So
saying that if
supposing a theist says, look, God is of a certain nature, we would predict that on occasion he does certain things, intervene in nature. That would be a prediction.
sure.
And we would say, look, the fact that we have events for which there's no plausible naturalistic explanation and fit with what we take to be God's character, wouldn't that be as good as what we do in other areas?
Sure, I would agree there, but the
Well,
part
I
would disagree with
I would
is
claim that is in fact the case.
well, I would disagree with that no plausible natural explanation part. That part, I think we have for every one of them. We have a plausible natural explanation. It was a delusion.
But there, you have to then give me reasons why that is not ad hoc, because we have pretty good science as to when people are under delusion. We have criteria for distinguishing between when somebody's under delusion or not. So, what it will not do is to say, well, anytime somebody reports something that I can't get my mind around happening or can't provide a plausible natural explanation for, therefore it didn't exist, and they say it must have been a delusion, you're a priori ruling out non-natural explanations.
Well, I don't think that's a priori. That would be a posteriori. So if I have prior evidence of delusions in this case and no evidence of it occurring,
But what if you don't have prior evidence of delusion? What if
that would be so that would be an interesting.
What you just said to me earlier was that you would insist the person was deluded, even if you don't have any independent evidence for them being deluded.
Well, that part I'm getting lost on because I think we have tons of evidence of human brains being deluded.
What evidence did Laplace have for people being in it? You said you would agree with Laplace.
Yes.
What evidence did he have that these peasants were in fact deluded?
I would imagine, I don't know much about Laplace, but I would imagine he has lots of examples of people being deluded. And I think he'd have a higher proportion of delusion among peasants. And so he would probably be rational to conclude that peasants were delusional at a higher rate and said lots of things of this kind that were false.
Peasants are as capable of noting a rock falling out of the sky as a university professor.
Sure, but they're also more capable of noting false things than a university professor.
But well, false explanations, but I don't think they're automatically more at risk of being mistaken about a rock falling out of the sky than a university professor would be.
I think they would be, yes. So, like, to give an example, there's a
because they're credulous.
Credulous? I think just ignorant. I think ignorant would be a better term here. So, for example,
what does it take to recognize a stone falling out of the sky? Not very much.
To recognize it wasn't a delusion would take more. Like to recognize the difference between was this a thing that actually happened versus a part of your imagination, there are many different things that we think are real, false memories that are false. And as a university professor, you'd be more inclined to understand that that is a possibility and how to filter out that possibility than a peasant. For example, there are bereavement delusions. Bereavement delusions we know are extremely common. They happen to about 60% of old people who have a dead loved one. They see, hear, can touch their dead loved one after they die. A university professor who knows what a bereavement delusion is isn't going to say, I literally saw my raised dead loved one. They're going to say, I probably had a bereavement delusion. A peasant who doesn't know of this information.
But then,
would not have that information. They wouldn't know what a bereavement delusion is, and so they're more plausible to say, "I literally touched my dead loved one. They came back from the dead," and so I would be rational to be more credulous of the claim of the peasant because they don't have the information of the different kinds of mental delusions that humans have to be able to filter those out as a possibility. Therefore, in the same case of the seeing the rocks fall from the sky, because the peasants don't have the background knowledge to differentiate biases and delusions that are innate in human brains, they would be less qualified to assess whether the event that they saw was a real event versus something they had a delusion and just didn't know what the delusion was.
well, going back to whether the event occurred and what's the best explanation, we have events of what you might call spontaneous healing, where we know the event occurred, and we can believe it on the basis of testimony. Okay, so
Yep.
then that brings us back to the question of what is the best explanation. And it won't do there to say, well, everybody that has seen this person and says, they're healed of a condition, they were instantaneously healed of a condition. It won't do to dismiss all their testimony as the basis that they're deluded. So then the question will go to the second issue of what's the best explanation. Okay.
Yep, I agree.
Okay. So at least in principle, testimony can establish highly, highly unusual events.
Sure.
Okay. So then the question is, what's the best explanation of those events?
Well, actually, wait, I would probably say that testimony would give us a reason to investigate. And if we could investigate and find empirical data, then we would believe the event occurred rather than simply, I don't think the testimony is enough there. So like if
But do
there's a
you,
miraculous healing, for
but do
example,
you,
like cancer
well,
or
wait,
something.
I haven't called it a miraculous healing yet. I've only
Well, I
called
think
it
those
a
happen.
healing.
I think the healings like spontaneous remission, I think those happen. So I think those are real events. Spontaneous healings. I think those are real events.
Okay. But you probably believe that on the basis of testimony, because look, I want these two questions separated. One, are we entitled to believe the event happened? Okay. At this point, I'm only asking, did the event happen? And I think on the basis of testimony, we can very often take ourselves to be justified in believing the event happened, even though it may not be predictable.
Well, I think I disagree with you.
You don't agree with that, or you do?
No, I wouldn't. So like in the case of spontaneous healings, are we rational to believe they happen based on testimony? I'd say nope. I'd say in order to believe they're rationally happened, we would need x-rays, we would need actual things we could see, we would need the blood samples that shows they have the antibodies or whatever.
Well, you just told me that you believed that these spontaneous healings happen
because they have all of those things.
But they have but what basis are you believing it on and taking yourself to be justified in believing it?
Well, again, my personal knowledge here is irrelevant. The fact that I believe
but I'm asking you, do you accept that your belief is justified?
Sort of. So I'd say that if I really cared, if I really wanted my belief justified, I would investigate in the field, find the actual data myself, and then confirm it.
Yeah.
I don't do that because I don't care. So I wouldn't say mine is sufficiently justified to the degree that I think you're asking the question about. But I think that it could be. I think I could go do the research. I could justify it in this case very easily. I'm just sufficiently inductively accepting of the methodology of science to just trust the methodology of science, regardless of my...
Let me refer you then to a book here called Testimony by C.J.A. Cody. And he argues very carefully, very expertly, it's the standard in the discussion of testimony, is we can't get out...
What is his name? C.J.A. Cody?
I believe that. Cody, C-O-A-D-Y, and the book is Testimony. I believe it's
It's the
I think it's
epistemological status of testimony, 2002.
yeah.
Gotcha.
Yeah. You will find that you can't get as free from testimony as you're suggesting you can. But assuming that we can establish the event occurred, we could take blood tests of the person, we can take x-rays before and after, we've established the event occurred. Okay.
Yep.
Then we move to the question of what's its best explanation.
Yep.
Okay. And if as we investigate, it gets harder and harder, the more we know, then that would seem to be reason to say that it's more probable that we have a non-naturalistic explanation than a naturalistic explanation. Now, why do I say that? Well, we know that intelligence can produce structures and patterns in nature that would not otherwise occur. So we look at this and we say, look, as far as we know, with undirected forces, this can't happen. And then we say we look at it for another 20 years, and the more we know, the harder it is to provide the naturalistic explanation. Then at some point, the best explanation would seem to be an explanation in terms of intelligent causality. Now, if we know we didn't do that, then it becomes rational to think that we can make reference to a non-natural intelligent cause.
I probably wouldn't agree with that, because I'd think until we had some independent evidence of a intelligence outside of brains, or an intelligence made of brains that are outside of humans or something, then it couldn't be a plausible explanation that such a thing did anything. So if we had, here's a miraculous healing, we can't explain it, and no matter what we look at in nature, we don't find a way to explain it, I don't think we could then infer it was a non-natural intelligent design, because we don't have any evidence of non-natural things, just like we don't have any evidence of a natural force that could do
what
this.
would you allow to be evidence for a
Novel testable
non-natural
prediction.
intelligence?
So I'd say
What
that
would you-
I could give a prediction, say if there is a non-natural intelligence, say it's named Bob, Bob will do something in the universe. Like if I pray to Bob, he'll generate a gold brick. I pray to Bob, gold brick appears. That would 100% be evidence of Bob.
Okay,
Or
now does Bob have to do it every time you ask Bob?
a higher rate than chance, whatever that means. So
Okay.
gold bricks appearing have a pretty low rate of chance, so it just has to happen enough
So
times.
supposing we find that we have these kinds of healings at a higher rate than chance, could they be taken as evidence for this non-natural intelligence?
If there's a causal relation that it happens under some testable position. So if you pray to Jesus and it happens at a higher rate than if you pray to the spaghetti monster, then yes.
Okay, so in principle, you would agree.
Yep. Yeah,
Yeah.
novel testable predictions I'm happy with. So if you could pray to a
Okay.
particular god and it happened at a higher rate than at any other control standard, yeah, absolutely, that's evidence.
Yeah, and what I would argue is that this is in fact empirically the case. So when I talk about miracle, and you'll see this in my book, The Legitimacy of Miracle, I say the philosopher's task is to remove the conceptual underbrush. Like where you and I have arrived is you've said, well, in principle, you could convince me that it's a miracle if the empirical data were right. Okay.
Yeah,
And
I started with that actually. I was trying to give that exact example.
This is a long way from Hume, who said that never in principle could you be justified in believing in a miracle. So yes, if you want to know whether miracles occur, then all that philosophy can do is remove bad objections. The task of saying whether in fact this happens will be a historical inquiry. Okay.
Oh yeah, I absolutely agree. I would agree that
Yeah.
saying that it's in principle impossible for miracles to happen would be false. I would agree. So I do think Hume, we've made some progress since Hume there, and I believe it is possible for miracles to occur. But I do believe it is, as long as there is a more plausible alternative explanation then it won't be justified to conclude miracles, and you would need some kind of novel tests and predictions to get there.
Yeah, well, I would agree. What I would argue, and again, for a better than us interrupting each other and talking over each other, I'd suggest my book, The Legitimacy of Miracle. The question is, as I would say, it is ultimately an empirical question. And maybe we'd both agree that when you come to the arguments for God's existence, I think it's very important and very helpful to take them in line with our science. So if we're looking at the teleological argument, I think it's relevant to look at scientific questions around the origin of life. If we're looking at the cosmological argument, I think it's very helpful to look at the cosmologists. So, if you're right that we could that we don't need an eternal universe, that we don't need a past beginning universe, then that undermines the cosmological argument to a great degree. But it is important to give a fair inquiry into the competing explanations. Is it like if we begin by saying, well, it's always the case that a naturalistic explanation has to be better than a non-natural explanation, that introduces an a priori element that is not it's not fair debate then.
Oh yeah, absolutely. I would agree entirely. I'd say that you need an a posteriori basis of evidence to conclude that, but you'd never be able to do it a priori for any reason.
Yeah. So you might say, I don't want to put words in your mouth, but you might say we agree largely on approach. We disagree where the results come out.
Sure.
Yeah.
We do have some questions from the audience, if you don't mind.
Sure.
Riki DePere asks, ask him what year and who his quote is from versus your last year direct quote. I think he's asking about the Vilenkin thing. When was the quote in the book from the Vilenkin one, and when was the quote from my video? Which one is more new, I think?
Well, if you're right, I think your quote is more new, but I'm not sure that did you actually show Vilenkin, or did you show colleagues of his?
I showed Vilenkin himself and Guth himself.
Okay, but did you show Vilenkin saying?
Yes, there's a picture of him on the screen. Like if you go back to the video at the timestamp, you'll actually see Vilenkin himself speaking in his voice and Guth himself speaking in his voice.
Yeah. I'm happy to send you the link to the quotation that I gave.
Cool.
Can the questioner get that from you?
Sure, but he was asking what year it was. Do you just have the year that it was published, like a 2002 book or something?
Just a minute till I see whether I can get back to it quickly. 2006, I believe.
Mine are from 2022.
Yeah. I would caution your listener, though, that does not. I have a link here I'll send to you on his article where he did October 2015 inference. It's an article, and I would hope that you would agree that we would have to take him in the context of what he most says. Okay. Is there another question?
Yep. Blow Me Up asks, how many gods are possible? If one is possible, what would make that god special if there's more than one?
What I would argue here is that if you want to get a coherent metaphysics, polytheism isn't going to work very well. And indeed, pretty well all polytheistic religions posit something more fundamental than the gods.
Gotcha. Goblin Lord asks, Why do you think he can have an explanation if we only have an account of an observation? We may not have enough info.
Well, we may have lots more than one observation, but routinely we develop hypotheses to explain our observations. And technically, science is always in the danger of affirming the consequent. We take hypotheses to explain observations, but if there's more than one hypothesis that explains the observation, how do we decide between hypotheses? And you and I have precisely been going at that this morning. You may grant that a certain event happened, say a spontaneous healing. You're going to want to say, well, my hypothesis better explains it than your hypothesis. So what science typically does is it employs what's known as abduction, inference to the best explanation. So typically for large-scale hypotheses such as naturalism or theism, we will need to develop a cumulative case argument from all sorts of different areas.
Gotcha. Goblin Lord also asks, it sounds like you are stating because we accept something did happen, we must also attribute it to the something even without sufficient info. The asserted cause, I imagine he means.
No, I'm precisely denying that. That's why I want to separate the two questions of did the event happen from the question of what's its best explanation. And when we are deciding whether an event happened, I'm wanting to say that theory should not trump observation. So all too often, scientists they fall in love with a certain theory, and when something happens that doesn't fit the theory, they deny it. So the example I gave of Laplace denied that precisely because astronomy at the time had no room for meteors. So very strongly, I want to say that observation trumps theory. The fact that I would not expect something as a theist, say evil, should not prevent me from acknowledging evil. The non-theist seeing an event that it's very difficult to give a natural explanation for should not therefore deny that the event happened based on the fact that it's difficult to explain naturalistically.
Gotcha. Paul D asks, why won't polytheism work? What do you mean you said that to have a coherent worldview, polytheism would not work?
Well, various reasons. One, you don't have a unity, and typically you begin to ask for origin of the different gods. So, for example, in Greek polytheism, you find that Aphrodite, her origin story is the foam that collected around Zeus's, I think it's Uranus's genitals when they were thrown into the sea by Zeus. They just don't seem, polytheism doesn't fare well when it's exposed to rigorous philosophical thinking.
I think he's more generally asking, why wouldn't it be possible to have multiple necessary beings essentially at the same time? Why would you need one?
You've then got a problem of how those beings relate, and you typically seem to push it back to some common environment that they both inhabit. And then the question is, well, this environment seems to be more fundamental than the things that are inhabiting it.
Couldn't the environment just be one of the necessary things? So there's a necessary connection between two necessary beings. And
then you're going to have puzzles over what is the relationship between these different necessary beings. Now, I'm not saying that it's logically impossible. I'm saying that as you develop, a comprehensive understanding of reality, it doesn't wind up being the best explanation.
Gotcha. Big Bad Mama asks, most biblical scholars know that the miracles to be metaphors. Why do you insist they are literal events?
I disagree that most biblical scholars view it thus. I would say in addition to that, I don't think truth should be determined by consensus. I think it should be determined by argument. So I'd be happy to give you a list of biblical scholars who take the events recorded in, say, the Gospel of St. Luke, as they don't give the indications of metaphor. So there are ways and genres by which we recognize metaphor. The Gospels don't display that.
Gotcha. Benjamin Thomas Blodgett asks, what is a falsifiable test you can perform to check your beliefs?
I think that will differ for different people depending on what their background beliefs are. It's notoriously difficult to falsify large-scale theories. Let me give you an example. Some people have said that evolution as a theory would be falsified if you found the fossil of a rabbit in Precambrian strata. Well, I can guarantee you that would not work, because that would be ruled out as an outlier, as probably a fraud, delusion, etc., etc. You would need a large accumulation of evidence, and it's very difficult in advance to say what that would be. At some point, if enough discordant evidence comes in, then you move on to a different explanation. That may be happening in the area of the origin of life. The more we know, the harder it is to give a naturalistic explanation. Okay.
CJ asks, how does the hypothesis of an unembodied mind predict anything about the world? If Robert needs to build a specific desires into his hypothesis, how is he not merely engaging in a just so story?
I think a good atheist philosopher that you might want to look at here is Paul Draper, and he would make the point that it's, as long as your hypothesis is not entirely ad hoc, then it's legitimate. If we have some ideas about what we would take the nature of a divine being to be, then it's legitimate to use that as a hypothesis. So, for example, it seems clear that evil is evidence against the God hypothesis. The question is it sufficient evidence to say that God does not exist? We must always evaluate disconfirming negative evidence in the context of positive evidence. If there was no positive evidence for God's existence, then it's entirely justified for the person looking at the problem of evil to say God does not exist. I suspect Tom would take that position.
Yep.
That there is no positive evidence and that evil is disconfirming. On the other hand, I would argue that we have all sorts of positive evidence, and that it outweighs the negative evidence from evil.
And I would agree with Draper that any you can make up any hypothesis you want as long as it's not logically contradictory. I'm fine with that. Benjamin Thomas Badgick asks, what would be evidence against your belief?
Well, one is I admit that evil is evidence against my belief. I suppose if we were to come up with evidence that the universe has existed eternally, that I would see that as counting against the Callum cosmological argument, which I think is compelling. Again, if we had a totally convincing naturalistic account of the origin of life and things like the Cambrian explosion, I would say that would put paid to the teleological argument, maybe not the fine-tuning form of the teleological argument, but that would undermine my confidence. It's relevant here to mention Thomas Aquinas. Thomas Aquinas says there are two basic reasons that people do not believe in God. One is they don't think the hypothesis of God is necessary to explain things. So Occam's razor, do not multiply entities needlessly, would come into effect. The second is the problem of evil. Now, I happen to think that appealing to God as a necessary explanation of the origin of universe, as the origin of biological life and development of biological life, I happen to think that we're not multiplying entities needlessly, but that the data requires it.
Gotcha. I think that is it for the questions. And we had been going for about 2 hours. Really appreciate you coming on. It was a great conversation. Do you want to give any links or references where people can find out more about your work?
It won't be for a month or so, but I am at the moment having a website developed, and there'll be a number of my articles there, and perhaps some selections from my book. So maybe if Tom gets back in touch with me a few months from now, I can send him a link. Or
Cool. What is your book about?
What is my book about?
Yes.
There's a book.
Go ahead.
There's a book. The book I would refer people to, I've written a number on miracle, but the book is called The Legitimacy of Miracle. I noticed John has a question. What does Larmer make of Fales' argument against divine intervention? I do have a response to Fales' book. And if people want to email me at rlarmer@unb.ca, I'm happy to provide links, or in some cases, the article. If you just think I'm an idiot, I'd appreciate if you don't contact me. If you just want to call me an idiot, but if you're looking for some of my material, or perhaps a reference to material I'd recommend, then by all means feel free to email me.
Do you have a short version of what is Larmer's argument and your response to it?
For miracle?
Yeah. What are for Fales' argument against?
Oh, Fales' argument. Fales does not. He begs the question by saying, well, we always know that energy is conserved, but that fails to acknowledge that if miracles occur, then energy is not conserved in the universe. So he can't rule out energy never being created by simply saying it never happens, and then use that as a reason to say, therefore, miracles can't happen, because that would be like saying, well, we know there are no mice here because there's no evidence. But then if I give you evidence of the mice, you say, well, there couldn't be mice here because we've already established there are no mice. Okay. But for the longer version, look up the article. It's in the International Journal for Philosophy of Religion. If you drop me an email, I can send you the reference.
And Kane wanted me to ask his question. Do you believe in witches? How much do you attribute your daily life to witches? I think because there's been lots of testimony of witches in the past, kind of thing.
How much do you attribute to your daily life to witchcraft spells? I would say, really, I don't attribute what happens in my life. I don't think I attribute any of it to witchcraft spells. Perhaps...
I think the argument is implying there's tons and tons of testimony of witchcraft and witches, but we reject that. Why wouldn't we do the same to miracles, kind of a thing?
I would be happy to explain why I reject that and not miracles. That goes into the detailed empirical stuff. I will say that we, in history, can be ashamed of what happened to a lot of women when witchcraft was taken so seriously. Now, you might ask a further question. I don't think that I would link it to witches, but you might ask, do I believe in a devil, or do I believe in demons? That's a different question.
Gotcha. And do you have like just a brief answer to why you would reject witch testimony but not miracle testimony? What is the difference between those kinds? Because I think most atheists see them as pretty much synonymous.
The amount of evidence. I can point to really, really strong evidence for miracles, and it's not nearly as good evidence for witchcraft. Now, that does not mean that I don't think that you could have evil supernatural influences that cause things in the world.
Gotcha. All right, that's it for the questions. Thanks again for coming on. I really appreciate it, and I hope you have a wonderful rest of your day.
Yeah, you too, Tom. Thanks.